Hey guys, welcome back to Star Wars Timeline. My name is Ben. I am honored to introduce John Jackson Miller. And you might ask, who is Mr. John? And I will answer you. He's a New York Times best-selling author responsible for some of the most beloved franchises like Mass Effect, Halo, Indiana Jones, Battlestar Galactica, Star Trek, of course, and what we're here all to talk about, Star Wars. He is also a noted comic book historian specializing in researching comic book circulation, and you can check out his project at comichron.com. I'll drop all the relevant links down in the description below so you guys could check it out. Now, after this grand introduction, please tell us what is the latest in the world of John Jackson Miller. I understand you have a new Star Trek book coming out shortly, within a couple of days, right?
Well, yeah, and also a new Star Wars book. So it's a convenient collision of franchises here.
Yeah.
The Star Trek book is the novel Star Trek: Strange New Worlds: The High Country. It is the first novel in the whole Star Trek: Strange New Worlds franchise.
Mm-hmm.
It's something which I think will have some appeal to fans of some of my Star Wars work, just because it is similar in many respects to a book that I did called Star Wars: Lost Tribe of the Sith, and in which a group of characters were trapped on a planet with no technology, and they had to sort of survive. Mm-hmm. This is the kind of thing that happens to the crew of the Enterprise in this novel, that they're trapped without their technology. And one of the ideas that I ported over from Lost Tribe of the Sith is the book actually has maps. So nice. it shows the world from the perspective of the people who live there. That is a lot of fun that we were able to do that. And so, we have that book that is coming out on Tuesday, February the 21st. Mm-hmm. It comes out in hardcover, audiobook, and ebook. I encourage everybody to go get it that week.
Guys, please go ahead, check it out. I'm personally picking up all my books in hardcover. As much as I love my electronic reading, I do have my Kindle as a companion. I prefer hard, solid books in my hands.
Yes.
And, when Star Trek, The Strange New Worlds was announced, we're obviously living in, so to speak, a renaissance of Star Trek shows, which I'm a giant freaking fan of. I watched every main series all the way up to the recent ones, or up to Voyager. Every single show I watched, I'm a huge fan. But I just didn't have quite time to check out Strange New Worlds, but I'm definitely am interested. But also to make a point out of it, Star Trek is as much of a cultural icon as Star Wars, arguably, if not more. It's spawned a whole generation of kids who, dreamed of becoming scientists and astronomers. What draws you specifically to these worlds, to this franchise as an author?
Well, Star Wars and Star Trek, both in my own fandom, and then also in fandom in general, and also in the publishing of tie-in works, mm-hmm. They sort of spiral around one another in terms of reacting to one another and building on ideas and concepts that the other have come up with in terms of what is possible in publishing and what is possible to do in a shared universe kind of a setting. For me, Star Trek filled the void between the Star Wars movies that was quite significant in between Return of the Jedi and the prequels. And the Next Generation series gave me a chance to see Star Trek on the air from the beginning, as opposed to in reruns, mm-hmm. Randomly shown.
That's how I saw it as well.
Which is how everybody else saw the original series of a certain age. Mm-hmm. So it gave me something to latch onto. I have, depending on how I describe my own personal creative story, I developed a Star Wars comics pitch in the mid 90s. Mm-hmm. But I ended up not sending it in. The first prose story for either franchise that I pitched that got accepted was actually one for Star Trek. Oh, nice. But again, that story didn't get picked up because the short story series that it was going to be appearing in was canceled. And so it just happened that I got to do Star Wars first.
Mm-hmm.
But again, showing how things are interconnected. The editor at Lucasfilm, the Lucasfilm fiction editor, Jennifer Heddle, she had worked at Simon and Schuster with Ed Schlesinger, who is the editor of the licensed fiction titles over there, and she helped connect us. And so it's one of those things where this is all very fun. I mean, I mentioned the maps that were in Lost Tribe of the Sith. They came about because I asked my editor on Lost Tribe of the Sith, who was Shelley Shapiro, if I could do the maps, and she says, "Well, John, that she worked with Judy Lynn and Lester Del Rey. She was their assistant. She drew the maps in most of Del Rey's books for years and years and years. So she was
awesome.
Enthused and interested in that. And of course, if you go back even further, the Del Reys, part of what got them their imprint was the success they had with a couple of products for Star Trek.
Right.
Because the blueprints, the Franz Joseph blueprints for the Enterprise, ended up being there was something that Joseph had created for just for the fun of it. He showed it to Roddenberry. Roddenberry approved him selling it at conventions, and then approved him selling it to the idea to Del Rey. And it ended up that this is something which is a portfolio of map or blueprints. It's not really a book, but it ended up making the New York Times bestseller list for books.
Nice.
In the 70s.
And what's interesting also, I was introduced to Star Trek much later in life, when I was vaguely aware of it back when I was home in Russia. I came to New York when I was 14 years old, and later on I got exposed to Star Trek. It's interesting to comparing both intellectual IPs, because on one hand, Star Trek is more sci-fi, yet it has elements of fantasy. Star Wars is, often considered or described as space opera or space fantasy, but both share some similarities but also differences. What do you feel that each franchise has to offer to you as a fan that is so different from one another?
What's interesting is that Star Trek has this structure in terms of the Starfleet is there as sort of a naval or military, in a sense, structure where you have characters joining a starship and then leaving the starship, or going one way or there, and then having missions. But one of the reasons that one of my favorite movies from the original series, Star Trek III: The Search for Spock, is one of my favorites, is because it is, in a sense, the Star Warsiest of those movies.
That's a good point, actually. Yeah.
Because again, it's about the family. It's about the small group of characters deciding that they're going to defy the larger organization. And I would have been satisfied personally if they had continued to fly around in the Bird of Prey for as long as they wanted to after that, because again, I felt that that sort of added something to Star Trek, and the good news is that sort of a family thing has been a part of Star Trek since. I mean, the first episode of Picard, which just came out, it's very of the third season, is very clearly about that bond which is developed in the Next Generation cast over the years. And so I think that while there are certainly different kinds of stories that are told from one to the other, Star Wars has war in the name, conflict. There's this big larger thing going on. Star Trek has the voyage is in the name. The voyages are in the opening credits, in the speech there. It's part of an ongoing mission. It's an expanding, open-ended thing where there's not necessarily the Star Wars shows are trying to get to an end state, which is a happy ever after point.
Right. The classical
Where
good
there's a
versus evil
resolution.
motif. Mm-hmm.
Exactly, a resolution. And whereas Star Trek, it expands outward. And so one of the things that I've enjoyed about working in both franchises is they've got things you can do in one that you can't really do in the other. Star Trek, I can make references to world history without actually having to change it in any way, shape, or form.
Mm-hmm.
My New Dawn novel, there are elements of Russian history in the New Dawn novel.
Nice.
But obviously they are they're transformed, so we're referring to the transformation of the pre-imperial to the imperial society.
Mm-hmm.
It's not anything where I come out and am able to refer to Lenin's new economic program or anything like that.
Right.
In the book. Whereas in Star Trek, that's perfectly okay because Earth exists,
right.
And Earth's history exists, and so that's something you can do. In Star Trek, also, there's a heavier scientific or technological element to it. We don't really know why the Millennium Falcon doesn't work. The fact that the Millennium Falcon's hyperdrive is not working today can be a plot point, and it is a plot point in Empire Strikes Back.
Mm-hmm.
But the exact thing that is causing it not to work, they don't science their way out of the problem, which is what happens in Star Trek fairly often.
Right.
And there's really nobody in most Star Wars shows that is clearly the tech guy, the engineer, the science person. Yeah, you'll have whoever is the person who is designing the great weapon or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
but that's kind of an add-on that comes along later. The presumption is that pretty much everybody knows how to use all this equipment, and there's nothing particularly.
As an audience, you kind of roll with it. Not everything needs to be regurgitated and digested.
Exactly.
They kind of like come along with it.
Exactly. So, that is something where, I enjoy being able to do that. But and again, I cross these streams to bring in yet another franchise, the Ghostbusters. I cross the streams repeatedly in terms of I've got, the previous hardcover novel I did, which was Star Trek Picard Rogue Elements, is really it's the Star Warsiest Star Trek book I've done, in the sense that it is about Captain Rios, who is the sort of the equivalent of Han Solo or Kanan Jarrus, even from Rebels, in that he has been cut loose from Starfleet, and he doesn't know why he was cut loose, like Kanan. He doesn't know what happened. And he's having to sort of scrape out a living as a merchant trader. So there are elements of, Han and Chewie's life aboard, the Falcon in Rogue Elements and the spaceship La Sirena.
Okay.
Again, I think that anybody who, if they're preferring, a specific kind of book. I did a tweet some weeks back where I said, okay, well, if you like this kind of book in my pantheon or in my work, here's the equivalent Star Wars or Star Trek book that you would probably enjoy.
Makes total sense. So
again, I had mentioned Lost Tribe of the Sith and the Strange New Worlds novel have things in common. Rogue Elements and the New Dawn novel have things in common because, again, the character is cast off from Starfleet and doesn't know why, and is having to make a new life for himself.
Yeah.
The novel I did for the Emperor from the Mirror Universe, the Michelle Yeoh character, Emperor Georgiou. It was a novel called Star Trek Discovery: Die Standing. And in Die Standing, which incidentally is a title I got from Roman history because I'm
It's a
allowed to
badass
use.
name. I love it.
Well, yeah, well, see, yeah, the Roman Emperor Vespasian, his dying words were, "An emperor should die standing,"
Mhm.
and so that phrase is actually in the book, and we actually talk about it because it wasn't really it wasn't really as bold a declaration. He was actually
Yeah,
violently ill at the time.
yeah.
Uh, so it wasn't in battle. But that is a book where the equivalent of that book, in a sense, is the Kenobi novel. It's actually kind of the inverse of it.
Mhm.
It sort of imagines, well, what if it were the emperor that were exiled? What if it were the emperor who were cut off from everything,
Mhm.
all power, all everything, and was completely alone
Mhm.
without a power base or anything else?
Yeah.
What would Palpatine do? Well, she is not Palpatine, and even though she, a question always about the mirror universe is whether the people are really evil or not, or
Mhm.
whether it's just that their society rewards a specific kind of behavior. And
Yeah.
so that ends up being sort of the thread of that book, is like Obi-Wan trying to learn to live without the Jedi, without being a part of the larger scheme. She has to learn to do that, or her ambition will destroy her.
Mhm.
And so there you have it. I kind of try to do that, from book to book, and even Knights of the Old Republic. I see you have the giant Knights of the Old Republic omnibus
That's
there,
how I got
which,
introduced to your work.
oh,
Thanks to
thank
that.
you.
When the originals, I used to manage a local comic book shop here in New York City in the Bronx. It was like a video
Uh-huh.
game slash comic book store. And obviously, as a huge fan of the BioWare game, which we'll quickly
Yeah.
mention, guys, as we go along. Once I realized all it took just to see that logo, I'm like, hold on a second.
Yeah.
It's Knights of the Old Republic, yet it's not any of the known characters. It's only cast.
Right.
But what's really fascinates me, John? It's kind of leads me to the next question: is
Sure.
you are so versatile in speaking about all these different franchises and IPs that are so vastly different from one another stylistically, and just keep talking about them, going from one to the other. It's absolutely fascinating because I hear often when I see podcasts with professional authors or when I read how to read books, many successful authors talk about that very scary, frightening moment in between the books where, look, I know I have this talent. I know I've delivered the bestseller books that fans adore. But where to go next? How do I recreate that
Yeah.
magic? So my question to you is, working with such a giant volume of different styles of work and different IPs, talk about that space in between the novels. How do you prepare for the next project?
Well, one of the things that's helpful, at least in that regard, is Star Wars, Star Trek, Mass Effect, Halo, whatever the franchise is. They tend to be big machines that need to put out a certain amount of product,
Right.
and so there is usually a situation where I have had several periods over the years where you go immediately from one thing to the next to the next to the
Mm-hmm.
next.
Mm-hmm.
And there have also been sort of gaps where in part, well, I sometimes it's just because the state of the market or the license holder is in transition or something
Mm-hmm.
like that.
Mm-hmm.
There'll be a pause, and that is usually when I get to either branch out into other franchises. It's when I should be writing some things for myself, so that I actually own things. But usually when I get anywhere, then the call comes.
Mm-hmm.
So
That's awesome. I'm so glad that you're busy.
yeah, and with this particular year, I've been working on a couple of nonfiction projects. One is completed, and I'm waiting for it to appear.
Mm-hmm.
I did, related to what we're discussing. I did a pair of articles for two books that are coming out from Vernon Press.
Mhm.
These are scholarly works on the Star Wars and Star Trek phenomena.
Oh, nice.
And so I wrote about the literature and the comics and how they connect and relate to the original property and to canon, and how they feed on each other in terms of what we were discussing,
Mhm.
how they respond to one another's movement. And it's actually, in a sense, it's one article, two books,
Mhm.
but it was interesting for me to do. And then I've got other work as well, and you mentioned my Comicron site. So
Right, right.
it's a very often that after I spend a lot of time on a particular fiction project, that I do need a break anyway,
Right.
and that is when I usually I'm called on to promote the book or whatever, and I have so many stops for the Strange New Worlds book. I don't think we've ever I don't think I've ever put this much of a push into a book before, but in part it's because everything just timed out right.
John, before we start diving into Star Wars, I would be remiss if I didn't ask. Again, you mentioned these volumes of work obviously have their interim time, but how does John Jackson Miller reboot himself and take his rest and say, okay, I need to kind of like unload a little bit. I'm going to have some quick fun. Do you have any
Yeah.
hobbies or relaxation methods that you go through?
Well, it's one of the things that has been helpful to me is that what I do for promotion is also what I probably would be doing for fun anyway, which is going
Mm,
to conventions.
nice.
And even though the Comicron website is a scholarly work, it is a
Hmm.
it is a it is a there's an element of business analysis to it as well,
Hmm.
but it's also a hobby thing for me where I will I think I have just right at arm's length here. I've got magazines that have circulation data in them that it took me 25, 30 years to find these things,
Hmm.
and I finally got them on eBay or wherever. And so that adds to my collection.
Hmm.
And so it's a good idea for me eventually to get some hobbies that are not related to something that I would end up cannibalizing for work.
Hmm.
But I that's the way things tend to work out.
Yeah, I almost sense like a kindred spirit, not in the sense that I'm also a writer. I'm by no means that. But, I did get to interact with professional comic book authors in the Bronx area because Northern Bronx has like a
Mm-hmm.
community of comic book authors and musicians that are known in the industry. Like I spoke to some DC authors,
Oh
and
yeah.
they sort of mentioned to me that sometimes their perfect Zen time is when they get to actually remove themselves from all their work and get to spend time with family, go vacationing
Yeah.
somewhere, do kind of things that they enjoy. If we can move on now and talk about one of my favorite products in the entire umbrella of Star Wars is the Knights of the Old Republic comic books. Guys, for those of you who are tuned in and watching us today, we will perhaps touch upon some basic minor spoilers. We promise not to spoil the full story to you, just to give you a gist and talk about this wonderful series, which launched in 2006 and was continuously going on for 50 issues all the way up to 2010. And, it was published by Dark Horse Comic Books, of course. This is before Star Wars became canonized, after acquisition by Disney. And the comic book series followed the success of the original BioWare video game, Knights of the Old Republic, in 2003, which was actually inspired by, which I also think is fair to say that this comic book was also inspired by the first published Tales of the Jedi, which came out in 1993, which was conceived
Yeah.
by Tom Veitch, Chris Gossett, Janine Johnston, David Roach, and of course other authors picked it up and continued that storyline. So my first question, John, is was there any pressure or concern trying to satisfy those original Tales of the Jedi fans?
Okay. Uh, when the Knights of the Old Republic project started, and I was approached by Randy Stradley to do a series. Sort of the feeling was, yes, there's this Knights of the Old Republic video game, but that name came from us. because Knights of the Old Republic was the subtitle of one of those Tales of the Jedi series.
Right.
And so the notion was, well, you can set the story wherever you want, and we'll try to draft off of the events of the games. And at that point, you know, I had not played either game. I would do so, and I never played the second one, but I had my niece and nephews. They did playthroughs. They showed me bits of it, and what I determined was that the best place to put this thing was before Knights of the Old Republic, the first video game, and significantly before it, so that I wasn't going to collide with the events of that story right away, and yet. There would be the opportunity for characters from that story to walk through, and you know, we get Malik immediately, we get Revan immediately, although we don't really see Revan except in a crowd shot at the very beginning. But what we do is I create a separate power base that is a rival to Revan in the Jedi Order, and that becomes my story. And Zane Carrick and his trying to clear his name after he winds up stuck in the middle of this particular problem. And it is one of those things where we knew that we wanted to come in and touch on the game items. Well, first of all, nobody ever told me to do any of these things. I was kind of like, yeah, I wanna every so often. I did go back to Terrace. I wanted to show what it was like under the Mandalorians. I wanted to show what the street gangs were involved with, and that gave me a chance to get in Gadden and Mission and some of these other characters that you see in the game. That allowed me to put them on the page in what I hope was not a gratuitous manner. They weren't there to we never put, that was even during the stretch where we had words on the cover. We never said in this issue Mission appears. We never did that. But that was what I wanted to do. And then as far as the events of the Tales of the Jedi, they were more distant temporally. They were earlier. Right. So by a few decades. But then also there was a very distinct difference visually in terms of the presentation of those comics, because back then they did not know what the past should look like. And in particular, they did not know what the art direction of Knights of the Old Republic, the video, would be. Makes sense. And in Knights of the Old Republic, in KOTOR, the video game, the art direction was, it's just like Star Wars. It's we've hit this pinnacle of technology. Fashion hasn't changed, language hasn't changed, nothing has changed. It should, for the player, feel just like Star Wars, whether it's 100 years before or 4,000 years before. And here it is. And so that it fell to me to try to negotiate the difference. And so, I end up writing a number of things off to style. The fashions in the Tales of the Jedi era are just different. We have a flashback issue that goes back there that involves Hazen, the guy who is pulling the strings in some manner, and so we actually have an issue where we show the fashion sort of looking fancy and different like that, and then also I carried that through. Or rather, we carried that through with the house that's run by Lucian Dre, or actually his mother. Their fashions are very much Tales of the Jedi era. If you look at Lucian's cape and everything, cloak. There's gold gilt on things, and it's much more connected, I think, to the earlier stuff. And I don't know how much of that was, something that Brian Cheng did intentionally. I can't remember what I told him
Right.
we were writing it up, but it seemed to work, and it seemed to mesh. And so the way that I basically used Tales of the Jedi in Knights of the Old Republic was as a way to set up a looming threat, because there was a war with the Sith, and I needed something recent in the past for the Covenant to be terrified of. And that is how it worked out. It did take a physical form, in the form of Exar Kun's lightsaber.
Right.
But as it turned out, we also had elements having to do with all of these different artifacts and relics from the period, things that were touched with the dark side.
Right.
And as it worked out, that was the whole reason that they were on Terrace to begin with. Is that they were looking for one. So anyway, to make a long story short, I tried to basically fly between the surface of KOTOR and the sky of Tales of the Jedi, without crashing into anything.
Yeah, I think you've basically answered in this very, very interesting answer. My question was, how do you balance between what came before you, the material, the work that was developed, and while at the same time introducing your own voice and spinning your own ideas and having creative fun with it? And you just answered it so eloquently, because I distinctly remember, so I'm a trained animator by hand, traditional hand-drawn animation. I studied here in your School of Visual Arts, and as a huge gamer as well as a huge comic book artist, Cam Kennedy is one of my all-time favorite comic book artists of all time. So what I immediately noticed between the Knights of the Old Republic, the comic book, and also the Tales of the Jedi is how distinctly visually and tonally they are. And I think it only added to the whole universe of Star Wars. It's such a boon when you have creatively different writers such as yourself, creatively different artists who present you these different filters on what Star Wars can potentially look like. Because I remember half of the KOTOR fans loved how the video game adhered to Star Wars look. Others said, well, how come in 4,000 years nothing has changed? Other friends loved the very fantasy influenced Tales of the Jedi, garments and robes and lightsabers that connect to the battery, while some fans like, what is this? It's a very, very curious and interesting thing.
I particularly, part of my approach was to look at the Tales of the Jedi as a mythology. Because and this was kind of the way that we were looking at that stuff at Lucasfilm when I was discussing with folks at Lucasfilm at the time, because there are things that happen in Tales of the Jedi where the power level of the feats that are taking place are just off the charts. They're flinging planets and stars around and just can't, it just does not work.
Marco Ragnos, all I gotta say.
Well, and so that again is, so I treated that like it was these stories like they were sort of hazy recollections or retellings of what had happened, but that it was legitimate for the Covenant to be terrified of what secrets might be left in the past.
That's really, really interesting. So even within the tapestry of Star Wars expanded universe, I've got the honor of interviewing other Star Wars authors such as Kenneth Flynn, and so forth. And they talked about how when in the earlier stages, of course, all the authors were vibing off each other and sharing, trading ideas, but also saying, look, I'm going to carve out my little space within Star Wars and tell my story, because George Lucas provided this sandbox for all of you guys to interact with and, create your own stories there. But I want to talk about also KOTOR characters. I want to mention a few here. I think the comic book series of Knights of the Old Republic created some of the most memorable, timeless characters ever, which are unilaterally loved by Star Wars fans, old and new. Have a new hero type in the face of Zane Carrick, who is not your typical powerhouse Jedi. He's even dubious in the Force skills, which I personally felt was so intriguing and so different and refreshing. You have Marth Hero Griff or Griff, the Snivian smuggler, which I just adore the name of the species, Snivian, because it has something to do with snivelly. There has to be some comparison. You have Jeriel, who is an Arcanian Jedi female, but also has a tag-along sidekick, Camper, who is also inventor and a mechanic and also part of the same species. And you have an absolutely staggering, marvelous creation, Celeste Morn, who appears in issue 25, and she's a member of this Jedi Covenant, this amazing conspiracy faction, which you guys delve deeply. And I really appreciated the fact that you staked your storyline on characters that don't appear in video games. They're different, and yet it's all part of the Knights of the Old Republic. So how did you develop these archetypes?
Well, the archetype is one word, because obviously, Zane is the kid who's in over his head, and that is Luke Skywalker at the beginning of the movies. Griff is basically capitalism in corporeal form, and he's just wonderful. I my favorite character to write by far.
He's amazing.
I remember at one point, about 3 years in, Randy Stradley, the editor, said, we have a problem, which is that Griff never learns anything. And I said, no, Griff learns that he's right. Whatever Griff learns, whatever he takes away from anything, simply reinforces his certainty that his way of doing things is the proper way. And really, after we do have the moment where he risks his neck to save Zane, because good help is hard to find. And if we want to call that the moment where the Grinch's heart grows, that's fine. But I think that one of the features I think of humanity is that when many of us get older, we don't get wiser. We just act more like ourselves, become more extreme versions of ourselves. And so I thought, that's Griff. Jeriel and Camper, I wanted there to be the notion that there were other people who were living on the fringes of society, who were also on the run for different reasons, but we didn't know what the reasons were for them. And Camper's reason, comes along in the second year of the title. Jeriel, we don't get to until the fourth year. And the only reason that we didn't get to that earlier was because Vector came along, and that's with
Celeste Morn,
Celeste, and that was the case where when you're doing a comic book, you have to be ready to deal with things that you didn't know were coming along, and there was no inkling that there would be a crossover event in the third year. And once there was, and we wanted to have some impact in the series, we said, okay, well, let's do the commencement story, or not commencement, the vindication story. Let's do that in year 3 instead of year 4. And I reversed them, and it resulted in there being sort of a very different tempo, I think, to the to what was going on later. But that's how it works sometimes. Celeste, that was a case where that character was created by committee, in a sense, because it was all of us that were working on the crossover. But it was my idea that she would be linked in with the Covenant somehow, and that over the course of her exposure to Zane Carrick, she would realize, okay, this kid cannot be the threat that everybody says. And in fact, when the vindication storyline happens, Griff actually gets to say that to Kenia, one of the Jedi Masters, is that anybody who has actually watched this kid for 5 minutes would realize that he is not going to fall to the dark side. He is not this person you think he is. And everybody, and this is there's a little meta thing going on there because fans were constantly saying, "Will Zane you turn into Darth Sion or Darth Nihilus or whoever?" And I'm
Yeah.
like, "Have you been reading? Have you been paying attention? Uh,
Yeah.
this is the basically the most selfless character that we've had come along.
Yeah.
Yeah, and at the same time, he gets frustrated. He gets upset. He doesn't like his
He's a
situation.
human being. He's a relatable,
Yeah.
flawed human being that we all can look into and find a bit of ourselves. And that's what makes him so relatable. I always argue the point that in Star Wars, the characters that are not special, unique, prophecy children, but it's the hero types that we can see an average Joe in. I find myself the village pumpkin that Luke Skywalker is, that we get to associate with and say, oh my God, I could, when I was a kid watching them on VHS tapes with cheap Russian dubbing, my dad brought those tapes in, I saw myself in Luke. And that's across culture, across the world. I saw with Russian translation myself in this young man. I said, I want to be like him,
Oh, very good.
Yeah.
I want to note that I had many email conversations with the Russian translators for the Kenobi novel and the Knights of the Old Republic stories when they happened to try to get the words correct.
Oh, really? Yeah, that's interesting because the translation were so cheap because we had a culture of illegal taping of the American VHS tapes because there was no access to them. And sometimes the authors, the audio behind the screen would translate them on the fly, and they would not be able to translate everything. Like, for example, in a Russian version of A New Hope, you never hear clones. Yes, I saw this. I'm actually
Zvodnia Voyny.
Zvodnia Voyny. You got that.
By John Jackson Miller.
Yeah. It's I'm actually in communication with the guys who are like behind publishing the Russian versions on via Twitter. They're amazing guys. I'm so happy and honored that your work is being translated into Russian and the fans across the world, because art and literature brings the world together, even in uneasy, desperate times that we have today. Cross the world, cross our ideologies. You have a piece of literature like Kenobi, you hit it fans with, and we're like, oh, I'm a Star Wars fan, and instantly we find common ground.
Well, I know they did the translations. I've got them over here of Knights of the Old Republic too, and so it's and I'm always delighted when I discover new editions because I think that Kenobi has probably been in 13, 14 different languages at this point. I probably only have about 5 or 6 of the versions of it. But every so often somebody will ship me a case of things. And it's like, okay, wow. It's
that's awesome.
The stories, Star Wars, Star Trek, many of these things they're designed to be universal and inclusive. And Star Trek in particular, visualizes a world without want, 300 years in the future, and in which the society has gotten past a lot of the troubles that Gene Roddenberry was hoping that society would be past back in the 60s.
Yeah, I mean, my favorite series, the original Star Trek, was James T. Kirk. Coming out in the middle of 1960s, and they had a Russian operated there, and my heart was swollen with just pride and joy that we all could connect. We're all human beings. I mean, if all Russian kids grew up on Hollywood cinema, we peered into the world, into the window of what cinema is like. Like Breakfast Club, Indiana Jones, the Terminator movies. Like, oh my God, this is what America looks like, and we all connected that way. But closing the chapter on the Knights of the Old Republic before we move on to the next topic I wanted to talk about, what did you want the fans walk away with after reading the Knights of the Old Republic comic books?
Oh wow! Well, the thing is, it wasn't simply one project that I started and finished and was done. It was a process that went over several years, and then we took a break for a year and came back into another story. And so I think my hope was always that people would want more.
That's great.
Well, I on purpose, the first the 50 issues in the original series, on purpose I decided that that would take a little over a year in screen time,
Mm.
or a little over a year in continuity time, because I wanted to be able to stuff more stories in, and I didn't want, again, to collide with the events of the video game any sooner than I had to. But no, if we had done it in real time, we would have been right up on top of Revan and the Jedi Civil War and all this other stuff, and it would have really impacted my story. But no, my hope was that people would be interested by these characters and enjoy being around them and would want to be around them more. I think my series Knight Errant, which leads into, I had mentioned there's another Star Wars thing coming out. That is coming out March 14th. The Knight Errant graphic novels are coming from Marvel in a Knights of the Old Republic, not Knights of the Old Republic, Star Wars Legends: The Old Republic Epic Collection. This is Volume 5. And it has the 3 Knight Errant miniseries I did, and the novel is still available from Random House, and I think that they tried to do some things with the reprint to try to get some of my other material if we could get it in there. I think it wasn't possible to get it all in there because I did a map thing for StarWars.com for that sector of the universe, and also a short story. Wasn't able to do all of it, but the hope will be now this, as I say, this volume 5 comes out in March 14th. The hope will be that the big Knights of the Old Republic collection you have there, well, it has the number 1 on the side of it. That's because it's volume 1 of 2, and volume 2 will collect the 4th and 5th epic collections, so people will be able to have the Lost Tribe of the Sith comics I did, which are in volume 4, plus the Knights of the Old, plus the Knight Errant books, they're in volume 5, and so those 2 volumes will give everybody everything pretty much that I did in the everything that I did in the prequels period. But Knight Errant, the feeling I wanted people to have after that was I wanted them to see what she would do next. What would be her methodical steps to, try to undo this tangled knot of Sith warring against Sith. And had we gone further with it, it would have been further episodes like that where
I see.
Would have taken.
So there were more plans for that.
Well, no, actually, I had not. We were contracted to do the 2, and that's what I delivered. But I was always ready to do more, and there was no sense when I wrote that 3rd one that it would necessarily be the end of it. But I did still write the ending so that it would be a satisfying resolution to it if it had to be.
Gotcha.
Because I always do that.
Yeah. You basically cater to greedy fans like myself, because if I love something, I want 25 seasons and 500 books of it.
That's right.
Just give me more.
That's right. And and I was at that point I was starting to do more prose, and it was not out of the question that there could have been a Knights of the Old Republic or a Knight Errant or something else, novel, there was a Knight Errant novel. It's not out of the question that there could be more. Not out of the question that there could be more with Lost Tribe of the Sith. I certainly tried to make a number of things happen that got overtaken by other events, and then of course the Kenobi novel comes along, and by that point, that's when Disney buys Lucasfilm.
I think Kenobi was because I have a collection of every single Legends novel before that yellow Legends stripe, and I remember Kenobi was actually one of the last. 2013 it came out hardcover, and I believe the following year it came out in softcover. I got the chance to get the softcover as one of the last novels. John, you have actually read my mind. We have some kind of battle magic Jedi meditation going on, because you literally led into the topic that I wanted to talk about briefly. Obviously, we don't have all the time in the world. I will make a small confession here. I have not completely read all of Legends. I have read vast majority of them. I do a bunch of reviews on my channel. But Knights of the Errant comic book and novel I have not read yet, but I just wanted to still introduce fans to it because there are things that I completely and always acknowledge, some things that I haven't read or have a critical view of. I recognize that other fans might enjoy. And just to give you guys a very quick introduction, Knights Errant actually was 15-issue miniseries, which was published from 2010 to 2012 by Dark Horse Comic Books, and also had an accompanying novel, which was not a whole new idea in Star Wars. We had something like Shadows of the Empire by Steve Perry, who also had a novel with accompanying comic books that came before. And the events here, John, you already mentioned some of the plot lines here, but the general idea, the gist of the novel and the comics books was that it followed right after the Knights of the Republic comic books and introduced a new young Jedi Knight called Kara Holt. She's a Jedi on a mission in a Sith-controlled space during the Great Sith War. I just wanted to ask like a couple of brief questions, if you don't mind. First, did you write the novel and the comic book simultaneously, or were they two different separate works?
We actually got the contract to do them. The business part of it was about the same time. And it was something where they were looking for a first novel for me, and the fiction editor at Lucasfilm at the time, Sue Rostoni, knew that we were working on something for at Dark Horse, which at the time was just going to be called Jedi. We didn't have a full name for it yet. What happens is I realized that the comic book needed to be the origin story. The comic book needed to be the arrival story.
Got it.
And what I did was I decided, okay, well, that will follow it in sequence. And so I don't remember the exact timeline. My presumption is that I completely written the first series before I wrote the novel, and then before I wrote the second graphic novel, which would have been in order. Then the way that they actually released is I think the novel probably dropped like in between the fourth or fifth issue of the first series or something like that.
Right.
But it was fairly close to it. But it was definitely the case where I had. And there's our motorcycle.
There's our song, guys. It's a welcome from New York City. It's fine. Moving on. Sorry
no,
about that.
I definitely knew what had happened in the comic series when I was writing the novel, and vice versa. So I was able to feed back and forth. And setting this, here's another example. Setting up this universe. My master's degree is in comparative politics. Specifically what we would have called Soviet studies back at the time. As I've joked endless times, the Soviet Union collapsed on my dissertation, so I was not able to finish my doctorate. But I was able to make use of this. First, my first comic book at Marvel was Crimson Dynamo. But then also in Knight Errant, the way that I put it to work was that as comparative politics, what it is it's the comparison of different political systems in different states. During the Communist International, where there's multiple different countries that have their own regimes that are following some elements of Marxism and some not. What we learn is that everything is different from country to country. China is not the same as North Korea, is not the same as the Soviet Union, is not the same as Cuba or Vietnam or any place else. Everything has a local spin to it, but then it also has a philosophical spin to it that's different. And I said, okay, well, this is what this period is about in Knight Errant. Because what we see in a book that is included in volume 5 of the very last thing in the pre-Darth Bane era from the comics was a book called I, Jedi, a miniseries called I, Jedi, and that sets up the Rule of Two and Darth Bane and all of that. But it establishes that before that moment, there are so many Sith in the Outer Rim battling one another over what it means to be a Jedi, or not Jedi, but what it means to be Sith.
Right.
And they're battling for influence, and battling for who's going to come up with the proper the most suitable way that you can take over and rule the galaxy, negotiating the problem that is inherent in Sithdom, which is that the idea of being Sith is the idea of the elevation of the individual and the oppression of everybody else. And the way that I looked at it was that the ideal form of being Sith was Palpatine, and the notion of, well, he will be Sith, but he'll be quietly Sith, and he'll hijack an existing institution.
Right.
And then before that, you have the rule of two, which at least has the benefit of getting most of the chaos gone, and winnowing it down to just the master and the follower. Well, I figured, okay, I'm in this founding mothers period, where everybody's got a different take on it, and everybody has a different method. And so I thought that Lord Daemon, who is one of the Sith, he would have a god complex. He would have a creator complex. He would imagine that it was his fate to that he created the universe, and that everything existed just in his head. Then he has a brother, Lord Odion. And Odion is a god of destruction in his own mind. His goal is the elimination of all life until he's the last person to put out the lights in the galaxy or the universe.
That's quite an ego right there.
Yeah, well, that's the books. And with the two of them, we actually, that is, their arc we do get to conclude in the comics. We get to wrap it up. But then there are other Sith like that. Arcadia, who is related to these other characters, she runs her empire like a corporation, and uses sort of a Sith philosophies to do that. There's another couple of Sith siblings that choose to rule their realm entirely by force possession, you will do what I say.
Right.
And every one of these things is flawed in some way. And Kara, in her encounters with these folks, is able to find the internal contradictions, if you want to say so, in their societies, and subvert their attempts to take over. And but also, the story is Kara's in a sense, because she's also trying to find out what happened to her home world, what happened to her family, and she, over the course of the series, must come to the realization that she is not destined to end this menace. She is destined to save as many people as possible from being crushed in this collision.
In that sense, I don't know if you're familiar with Assassin's Creed video games. There's a trilogy of games specifically dealing with a character who is probably one of the more popular, Ezio Auditore, and it's a fantastic finale to that trilogy where, without spoilers, there's also this man who dedicated his entire life to fight these opponents.
Yeah.
He realizes by the end that he's not meant to be the ultimate solution, but only the instruments in the hands off, which I think is just such a beautiful send off for a character.
Well, that's a very good thing. I'm not familiar with Assassin's Creed is Ubisoft, right?
Yeah.
Well, I just did. I'm waiting for the release of a comic series I did for them for Dark Horse. Having to do with the a pirate ship game called Skull and Bones.
Right. I'm waiting for that video game.
Well, the comics are done.
Nice.
My friend James Mishler, who is a game designer who helped me work on the maps for this book here.
Right.
He and I worked together on the plotting of the comics and the scripts. And the comics are ready. We're just waiting for the game to come out.
That's dope. That's awesome. I'm excited for that. Also one last thing I wanted to touch, on the topic of comic books. I surmise that, writing for comic books versus writing for novels are quite different affairs, so to speak, two different disciplines. Comic books provide visual cues. Like, for example, you have a facial expression, which you don't have to write in script to convey to the audience. But novel relies more on imagination and requires the writer to supply that visual component of his world, so we're able to easily get into it and imagine your story. What would you say are some of the unique demands of each discipline?
Well, certainly in comics, you have to communicate to the artist that things in total, because you usually will not meet the artist. You're not in the same city. This is not the 1950s or 60s where everybody is at Marvel, everybody's at DC, everybody's in there's no bullpen where everybody's going to see one another. And so I have to try to be as thorough as possible in describing things, while also getting out of the way of the artist when it comes to things like combat scenes, where if I try to over choreograph things, that gives the artist way too much to have to handle, and that's really their space where they can really open up and do the kinds of things that they're so much better at than
and you have to be cognizant of that, of their skill sets, right?
Yeah, that's right. So I have to try to get out of the way at that point. At the same time, I have to know when it's necessary on my part to say, all right, here I need to actually take control of the layout, and there are several. You mentioned Griff. There are several humorous sequences with Griff and with Zane and the Muma brothers and other things where, there are there might be a 3-panel gag or a 4-panel gag, which is more or less like a comic strip, where there's a single page in an issue of Knights of the Old Republic where Dob and Del, the Ithorians, are talking about, we've got to grab the banker, and the other says, and then we're supposed to watch him. Well, and one of them says something along the lines of, I tell you what, let's watch him and then grab him, or something like that. And the other just stares and says, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. Whatever the joke was, I said, okay, to the artist, who I did not know who it was going to be. I said, well, these panels all need to be exactly the same size, exactly the same pose, because this is going to be more or less like a Charlie Brown comic strip, where it's one person says something, other person says something back, first person stares, first person says it responds to it, there's a 3-panel stretch of that in a conversation with Zane and Griff, where Griff says, wars make people act stupid, and wherever there's stupid people, that's where I want to be. And Zane just sort of looks at the camera and then says, I'm going to let that pass. And I said, this gag will not work if the artist is making this shot high, overhead angle, worm's eye view angle, close up, whatever. This is only gonna work if we just stage it this particular way and keep the camera. In jokes,
timing is essential, right? You gotta hit the right timing.
And so the same way that I need to get out of the way of the artist in terms of action, it's important to communicate when they need to get out of the way of the jokes.
Gotcha. That's awesome. That's so in-depth, and was always so exciting to me, that collaborative process between a conjurer of words, a wordsmith, an author who can completely imagine the world in his mind, versus now collaborating and bouncing off ideas of somebody who visualizes that world. I found that always fascinating. Guys, if there's one body of work which I think is arguably your greatest work that you're known for, is Kenobi novel. I think it's synonymous when we think Kenobi novel is John Jackson Miller. It's his work. The novel dropped in 2013 of what we know now as Star Wars Legends. And as I mentioned before, it's one of the more popular, one of the more known books in that series. And it also, in some way, shape, or form, informed the 2022 Disney Plus show, which we know for a fact that Deborah Chow has read it, and she's a fan of your work, like so many of us. I wanted to actually ask the John Jackson Miller, the fan, which story did you want to convey in that novel versus what Lucasfilm expected you to deliver?
Oh, well, I proposed Kenobi as a comic series back in 2006. So it was going to be a graphic novel. It was going to be a single done-in-one graphic novel. So, the story beginning, middle, and ending, that was something I can see, before we even talked to Lucasfilm. We did then find out, that it was, there were things where we knew that some elements in the book would be touched upon by the legacy comic series, having to do with Ashar and Het. And so I tweaked my story to deal with that. But then we got to the middle of 2007, and it was just looking like the window was closing for doing anything in the Dark Times period, because there was a rumor that George Lucas was coming back to Star Wars, and might do a TV show that would be set then. And so we shelved it. And by that point, I had already decided that it would not fit in the graphic novel. I said, this really needs to be in a big novel, and it needs to be a sprawling thing. And, if you tried to do this as a graphic novel, and I'm still hopeful that, they do graphic novel versions of novels, now and then. I am hopeful that if we ever do it, it would be something where, Andrea Muddy, who does he did some of the Knights of the Old Republic comics with me. He very much has sort of an Italian Western look to things. Sergio Leone. Kind of looked at things where there are a lot of long shots of the desert, and the lizard in the foreground, and the cactus and everything
very
else.
Very familiar with that. A huge Leone fan over here.
Yeah, exactly. And so that would be something where I think he could pull that off. Where I would think that the book, to do it right, it almost needs to be turned on its side as a graphic novel, which is not out of the question. It's been done before. Right. But I mean, that would be really something. But yeah, I realized that it needed to actually go in a novel. And so by the time we got to that, we are again in this sort of window where any time before, it probably could not have been successfully proposed. But we were right up against the purchase by Disney, where the philosophy had changed as far as doing novels about the major characters. Right. They wanted them at that point, and so that coincides
off limits in a way, right?
Well, there were three other novels that came out around that time. I think one of them came after me. There was a Han Solo starring novel. There was one with Leia, and then there was a Luke novel that came out actually after even New Dawn. And each one of these was sort of part of this new way of looking at things, where it's like, okay, we're not going to try to avoid the main characters. We're going to actually embrace them. And so Kenobi is timely then. But if it had been a year later, well, it probably is not a good time to do it, because at this point we've got the news of the Disney merger. Right. I had not started the actual manuscript when the Disney merger or Disney buyout was announced. The novel had been announced,
Yeah,
but
it was a
not.
big surprise for everyone, I think. Huge
Oh,
surprise.
definitely. But what happens is, I think Ellen McGregor was fairly early in there saying, I'd like to have a movie.
We
And
all
so
did.
I was for most of the end of 2012 and through 2013 until the publication of the book, I was in a panic that this thing would be overtaken by events.
Mhm.
And indeed, the very next novel that I did is New Dawn, which is where we're having to try to recalibrate everything
Mhm.
to accommodate the new works.
Yeah. I always argue in my, conversations. I try to have podcasts. I try to separate myself a little bit from what other channels are doing. I don't like blowing up news to talk about this executive, that director. I like to bring all fandom together. Canon, legends, it's all fiction. Welcome, join in on it and extract and enjoy parts and pieces of it which appeal to us personally. And I argue that art is a shared experience. It's a direct communication between the creator and the audience. So there is no one definitive Luke, just like there is no one definitive Batman. It all greatly depends on who, when, and how was writing that said character. I wanted to ask you, it was one of my dream things that if I ever get to interview John, I will ask this. Did you feel that it was a personal obligation, responsibility, George Lucas, for working on one of his major characters, Kenobi, or was it something that was liberating experience?
I found that the longer I inhabited the role of Obi-Wan's chronicler, the more comfortable I got with it, and the more natural it was. I mean, I'm immersed in this character, and part of how that novel works is that novel is 90% told from the point of view of everybody else.
Right.
So I really am trying to look at him really up close, from not the point of view of somebody who knows everything in his
Mm-hmm.
life, but
Mm-hmm.
somebody who just met him, who doesn't know everything about the Sith, who doesn't know everything about everything else. And I'm like, well, what more can we figure out about this guy? How would he appear to them? How is he trying to present himself to them?
Mm-hmm.
And you can't do that unless you kind of know the inner character. What is he really going through at the time?
Yeah.
And I think that we have. He has some emotional moments in this book, in one particular stretch that I hope are really earned, because he has had to bottle this business up for a long time,
Mm-hmm.
and I have crafted the situation and the Annalene character to where he can almost open up to her, but not quite.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt that it's my job with regard to the license, with regard to whatever thing I'm working on, is to represent the brand
Mm-hmm.
accurately and to add something to it if I can, that is not invasive, that does not ruin anything for anybody
Yeah.
else. And so I knew that the result of this story could not be Obi-Wan lives happily ever after, but I could find a way to get that character to some peace or equilibrium with what he's got coming up, because really, this is his first week in
Right.
jail. This
Right.
is his first month in jail. He's stuck. He's
Mm-hmm.
not going anywhere. He does eventually go somewhere, but that's in the TV show.
Yeah. It's I'm gonna kind of like open up a little bit to you, to fans, and I hope I'm not gonna get eaten alive for this. So, some fans that I've spoke to, including myself, were somewhat critical of aspects of this particular book, and I was very cognitive of what I'm critiquing comes out of ignorance, because you can only surmise so much. You don't understand all of the complexities and intricacy what goes into writing a novel, creating a show. So you have to be cognizant of like, hey, look, I'm going to critique. This is my own bias. This may not adhere to what happened in reality. And I say it as a devoted fan, as a huge follower of your work, that I believe that, there should be criticism from some informed fans. That's what you have. Fans who follow the franchise, follow Star Wars, and they get to say, well, this worked here, this didn't work here. Some of criticism comes as in a form of vitriol from somebody who so-called professional reviewers who are nothing about your work or nothing about your style and just want to critique. And I want to stress that all of it is biased. My opinion, someone else's opinion, professional opinion. I wanted to ask you first and foremost, how do you deal with fan criticism?
Look, the thing is, every project is a job. Every project is a story. We're hired to do a beginning, middle, and ending and put the toys back in the toy box when we're done. And our approach to each of these things, definitely, is sometimes it's impacted by things that are not in our control, and
Right.
sometimes it is. I know, even though I don't really read reviews, or I try not to, the one of the critiques of A New Dawn is we don't get enough of Hera's inner life. And the answer is we couldn't. We were not allowed to, because all of Hera's secrets are revealed in the TV show. That was not my place to do that.
Right.
And likewise, in the case of the Kenobi novel, look, the potential to do a novel about Obi-Wan Kenobi that has elements of what happened in the TV show, or he runs off to fight a Sith Lord, or a Sith Lord arrives to fight Luke, or whatever. They're to a degree. I look at these things and say, well, that is probably not something I would try to do, because that's a major change to the firmament. That's a major change to our understanding of Obi-Wan. I think there was a kids novel series that had, I think Jude Watson did a series where it was suggested that Obi-Wan was sneaking off planet every so often. And I was kind of like, yeah, I'm not sure that I would have tried to get that through, because that eliminates the possibility that he's never left before, or that might be fiddling with the status quo a bit too much. And it is really the province of the filmmaker, or in the case, something that Ewan McGregor is actually appearing in, to actually sort of break the seal and do that thing.
Yeah.
But it was also the case that I simply just did not want to do a cookie cutter story. I've joked many times that people, if you give everybody the story they expect, you're not giving them the story that they want, and don't know that they need yet. That's another line.
That's a
from
fantastic point. I think it's so valuable to understand it, because there's a huge distinction between what I want versus what works for the character or for the story.
And people are always measuring in their reviews often about how this measured up to what they were expecting.
To what I wanted,
And so that's actually another line from Randy Stradley. Give people the story that they want, but they don't know that they want it yet. But I mean, I look at it as this is if people wanted a story where there is one random Sith threat threatening Luke, well, you only get so many of those. You only get to do so many of those before it doesn't work anymore. And why would I add to it if I can find something else to say? And what is there to say about Obi-Wan in the first month of his arrival that's different from that? Well, I mean, again, this is the arrival is in the DNA of the story. It is about him learning to live here, and so it's very much the case where I think that there are things that could be done in the novel that I wouldn't be able to do if it were set 5 years or 10 years or 15 years later. At this point, he still doesn't know anything about Darth Vader. He still doesn't know anything really about what's going on and how long he's going to stay here. And so I figured, no, this thing is going to take place entirely on the ground, no space battles, no lightsaber fights. He is the mysterious stranger who's wandered into town, a guy with a past, and that past is haunting him. And that is our story. And for folks who say, well, why weren't you more ambitious with it? Well, no,
which is the criticism that I had of the book. Once again, trying to comprehend the angle that I'm coming from and my own ignorance of it. Yeah.
Well, but again, my thinking is, well, first of all, this might not be the only novel about this character. It happened that way, that it was the only novel about this character in this timeline. Right? But there could have been 4, 5, 10 more. Yeah. I could have written some of them. Yeah. And you don't want to rob, from the future to tell a story now, when in particular, what I wanted to do was I wanted to do a story that showed what it's like to live in a place like Tatooine when Obi-Wan Kenobi shows up. Basically there's probably a book for that, or a book for that person already. I used to joke that there's already a book called Star Wars Mad Libs that allows you to one Sith Lord, one planet destroying thing or whatever. Yeah. My role is to challenge your expectations to a degree. And does it still feel like Obi-Wan? Does it still feel like Star Wars? I think it does. And it's just it's not as the footprint of the story is not as sprawling as it would be if I took every toy out of the toy box.
Yeah. Partially the beauty of any creative work, whether it's any medium that you work with, is that as an author, you create something to the best of your ability, hopefully fully inspired, and then the jury's out when it's out there in the public eye, and we as audience get to interact with. But I just wanted also to talk about this specifically. For me, when I do Star Wars book reviews, and I love doing Legends, and I love honoring authors that I may not particularly enjoy a book of theirs, that I like to pass on the torch and say, well, look, maybe you will enjoy it. Please don't take my word for it, because our worldviews might be completely different. But I wanted to ask you this, John. Is when somebody's critiquing your script, your book that's in front of their desk, they don't know the author, they're not passionate about who John Jackson Miller is, perhaps they're just discovering Star Wars, and they have a piece of work here in front of them. Is critique all opinion-based, or are there rigid writing concepts that we can identify as effective? For example, tension in a dialogue or character motivation or certain things. What do you think?
A story is about communication, so you have to communicate properly. You have to make sure that your ideas get from one person to the other. And there are tricks with first person versus third person, and pacing and language that vary from creator to creator and vary from franchise to franchise. And sometimes if you do something that is completely unexpected. I think that Luke Skywalker novel, for example, might have been in the first person. There's a reason to do that, and it's you have to deal with the fact that there hasn't been a book like that before. And so, I'm with the Strange New Worlds novel. One of the things that is a situation in this book is my chapters are relatively shorter than usual. I mean, there's like 80 chapters in this book.
Oh wow!
Because there's a very kinetic, bang 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 to events that's happening in the book, and I decided that I would not have, when I have multiple different point of view characters, I would give them each their own chapter. I decided I was not going to shift change or scene change in the middle of chapters. And in particular, that's very helpful to the audiobook listener because
is the audiobook of this going to be like a radio drama presentation or just an audio?
It's not a radio drama, but Robert Petkoff does readings of all the characters in character.
Nice.
And that's the same with January Lavoie, who also has read for my Star Wars books, the stories I've done for Certain Point of View. I did an audio a radio interview with them. I do an hour for Wisconsin Public Radio every Christmas. And so if people go to WPR.org and search John Jackson Miller, they'll be able to hear an hour with me and Robert and January talking about the process of doing audio books for Star Wars and Star Trek, and dealing with sort of the difference that the fact that a huge part of our audience is now listening to these books instead of just reading them.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons that my chapters are shorter, because people tend to watch a TV show 5-6 minutes before they need a commercial break. Yeah. And we know from how we can track listenership on Audible, we know that people break between chapters, and we know how often they do it. And my hope with this was, I'm going to have a number of places where the reader can pause, but also where the commitment to, okay, I'm just going to just read one more chapter. I'm just going to read one more chapter.
Yeah. I would be partial to reading a book like this because I enjoy that quick pace and shorter chapters. But I'm also, as a kid, my father introduced me to a world library of books. And of course, we had the world classic, like when you read Jules Verne's and older classics, they have longer chapters. I kind of can't go in between each one. But it's fascinating now that you describe it to understand how the art form of storytelling needs to evolve with the audience, with our mentality, with shortening attention spans, with busier work schedules, that people can now listen to this stuff. It's fascinating. It's awesome. Now you could have this whole different understanding when you review a piece of work to understand, this is what the author had to take into account.
Yeah. And it's, it's not something where we did it entirely for commercial reasons or nobody told me to do it. Right. I like it more in part because I came from comics, and in comics, there is a cliffhanger at the end of every page, and you turn the page and there's a new event. You turn the page and there's a new event. This is not that short. The chapters. In fact, it's the longest novel I've ever written. Oh, wow. But it is the case where I wanted to I have multiple different characters who are on this planet that are trying to find one another, and I wanted there to be the feeling of progress. And there are cases where there's no progress being made, and people will feel that too. Yeah. But again, that it's all about mood setting. The Kenobi novel, again, that's one of those things where with the exception of the prologue, Obi-Wan does not appear for the first 60 pages. Right. And he even tells you in that first meditation that he feels the pace of his life slowing down to meet what life is going to be like around here. And that's me putting the reader in the mood that I want them to be. If you think that this is a planet where nothing really seems to happen, well, that's the way the characters feel too. Right. And then you find out things that are happening, and then things start to percolate. Yeah. But there's a lot of scene setting that tends to take place that is about atmosphere. It's about getting you immersed in the life of whoever it is. In New Dawn, you get to fly around with Kanan on a day in his life, and you realize, okay, this guy's lot is not great. Right. And do we launch immediately into the chaos? No, we don't. But there is some action. It's just, the intention is, you want to immerse people in the world. And I think if there's a phrase or an adjective that I think gets used with Kenobi more than any other, it's immersive. And that is what I intended for it to be.
Awesome. Well, John, I wanted to wrap our conversation up. First of all, thank you so much for your time. I'm completely delighted and honored to be able to speak with you. It's a dream come true for a Star Wars fan. I think I would never forgive myself, and my fans would not forgive me if we didn't. Just 2 questions on the expanded universe. It's obviously on the fateful day, April 25th, Lucasfilm decided to rebrand the whole 40-year rich legacy of written Star Wars into Legends. And I personally was one of the fans who was completely ecstatic about that fact. But for other fans, it's almost like spelled doom, like for hardcore fans. And, they seem to draw this line of Disney and post-Disney, George Lucas and post-George Lucas. I wanted to ask your opinion. Do you feel that it was a sound decision in retrospect to conserve the expansive and rich universe of Star Wars in its original format while giving the authors a clean new slate?
Well, this is my laugh because this is beyond my pay grade. Look, it's very clear that you can't give a filmmaker a $1 billion movie to produce and say you have to cover 25 books worth of continuity in the opening crawl. That's just not appropriate. And by the way, Chewbacca's dead, and Luke and Leia, Han and Leia had 3 kids. 2 of them are dead, and 1 of them killed the other. That you can't do that. So I understand that things needed to happen the way they did, but at the same time, I mean, the way that the branding worked, I think worked in the sense that this is the Legends material can be drawn from as inspiration, as the planets didn't all change, the species didn't all change, some of what we remember is different, but some characters still exist, like Thrawn, and things can be brought forward. And I think that this is the best way to mine one's history in a situation where things might conflict. When you do not have the option of time travel, when you do not have the option of a alternate reality, and as you have in Star Trek, and so. This is the way that it worked. And, I think what it does is it keeps the options open. It keeps the options open that if they wanted to return to a character, either in an extension of what had happened in the Legends era, or if they want to rebrand and reimagine and make use of a character, they can do it. They own it all. They can do that. And, obviously there are characters, a character from Kenobi turns up in the certain point of view Star Wars book in a story I wrote. A character from Kenobi turns up in the Canto Bight novella that I wrote. That's all good. So again, everybody's making this up as we go along because things are always having to change, having to do with events. We didn't know George Lucas was going to come back to Star Wars for the Clone Wars. We didn't know that the sale was going to happen. We didn't know that streaming would be invented. And we didn't know that, that Star Trek would all be coming back. And these original characters, future-proofing in a universe is not the easiest thing in the world. But, the way I've always put it is, the stories we love, matter, and they'll continue to matter even if they don't fit in perfectly.
Absolutely. I'll be the first guy there with the expanded universe flag reminding fans of this wonderful franchise that you helped create from ground up. But knowing how nitpicky and passionate Star Wars fans are, I almost feel grateful that EU didn't continue, because if it indeed was continued, not by you or Mike, Mike Stackpole or Timothy Zahn, but newer authors tampering with those characters, boy, they would be on a crucifix. Boy, the magnifying lens would be there, and friends like, what are you doing?
One of the things that we learned, and again, this comes up in those nonfiction pieces I did for the Vernon Press books, is that Star Trek in Star Trek fiction, they responded to what happened in the Legends situation by writing an ending for the characters that whose existence basically was made no longer possible by the Picard show. And that was a trilogy of books called Coda by my friends David Mack and Dayton Ward and Jim Swallow. And, there were fans that were appreciative of it, but there were also fans that were who had asked for it, who were not, because they didn't like the idea that these character stories are now over.
And you can't satisfy both camps. It's impossible.
And that's what I realized is, if you gave all of the Legends fans that were crying for a wrap up or a resolution, an ending, they would still not be satisfied because they don't want an ending. Yeah. They don't want all the characters to go out in a blaze of glory. They don't want everybody to die. They want more stories.
And I can definitely sympathize with that because, we talk about it in a sense, it's entertainment, it's books, it's just cinema. It's just, well, it's not just a movie. For certain people, it's a connective tissue. It's a glue that combines a family and happy childhood memories. It means so much to people. So I learned to understand even of some of the most critical fans, unless they start using, derogatory terms or like crazy nonsense. But, the last final question I wanted to ask you is, I was fascinated when we were introduced to non-canonical Star Wars storytelling in the modern day via Visions show, which is a combination of animated shorts, which are not connected anyway. It's an anthology. And also even a novel sprung from it called The Duel, which is a non-canonical novel. And I think it was such a infused Star Wars bold new ideas and freshness and playfulness that I thought it was really awesome. And my question is, you, John, what do you think is the best way moving forward? Should we keep pulling and extracting characters from the expanded universe into canon like we did with Thrawn's, or should we introduce more non-canonical shows and books that you could experiment with or even get to continue your favorite legend stories in?
The proper answers are to all of the above and whatever makes money. And all of the above as long as it makes money. Look, I think the comics world, I think the comics fans had less trouble dealing with the changes in continuity in not just Star Wars, but other franchises, because we have lived through 50, 60, 70 years of golden age characters, silver age characters, Tony Stark in Vietnam. No, he can't be in Vietnam anymore. He's too young for that. Reed Richards being a World War II veteran. No, we can't do that anymore. Nick Fury being a World War II
it would be silly.
Veteran. We can't do that. Well, and we've lived through the Crisis on Infinite Earths, and we've lived through Zero Hour, and we've lived through all these other things. And we're a lot more pliable in terms of our ability to handle cognitive dissonance and the fact that not just there are multiple versions of characters and multiple worlds and multiple Earths and multiple universes, but the notion that this might count and this might not, and if this comes in, cool, it got alluded to, and if that comes in, it doesn't mean that everything attached to it came in as well. So I think that's kind of the way of the future, which is that, look, my favorite Batman stories were never in continuity to begin with. They were things that were, Dark Knight Returns or Gotham by Gaslight or something that was, in an else world or where they just didn't say. And, I think that there are opportunities here for kinds of books like that, kinds of comics like that. Where people are they're able to figure it out. The fans will figure it out.
Yeah, eventually we will. I hope we are all come together and we get to appreciate it all. And I think my final question will address specifically that. John, once again, I'm honored to speak with you. Thank you so much for your time. You are one of the most talented writers working in Star Wars, and I don't say it lightly. You completely inspired me. This whenever new stuff comes out, I'll have it first day. John, what is your message to new Star Wars fans in regards to Legends, and what is your message to old school fans in regards to new Star Wars?
It's all Star Wars. It's all the characters, the people behind it. We love the old stuff, we love the new stuff, we love what we're doing, and the whole purpose of tie-in fiction, of tie-in comics, is to expand expand on the world that we were provided on screen, and to give some enjoyment to people playing with the toys in these sandboxes. And I think that my message is everybody gets to pick and choose what counts and what doesn't count in their own personal canon anyway. And yeah, eventually something may come along that makes you change your mind. I was just watching on TV before we went on the air. I was watching Rocky 3 on TV, and in my personal world, Rocky 4 never happened because Apollo Creed lives. But I like the Creed movies, and so I'm like, okay, Rocky 4 can have happened. Rocky 5, though, I'm still leaving out there somewhere. But again, that's fine. Everybody gets to do that. And these things can coexist. And if you want to figure out a way to make the Casino Royale that has Woody Allen in it fit into your particular James Bond canon, go with that. It's up to you, and it's not necessary that everybody agree exactly on everything, but it is the case that the storytelling does have to be managed by somebody who owns it in order to keep things going. And it can't be a situation like in Mass Effect, we all had our own versions of the reality. Well, at some point, everything has to converge back on one reality, or we can't continue to do books.
Yeah. John, please, if you could show us one more time your Star Trek book, please remind the audience, when is it coming out, where they can pick it up, and I will drop all the links in the video description.
Strange New Worlds, The High Country, comes out on February 21st, Tuesday, in hardcover, ebook, and audiobook. It comes out everywhere. I'm going to be doing the release party, sort of an event at the Barnes & Noble in Madison, Wisconsin, West Side, at 7 p.m. on that Tuesday. And then the following week, I'm at Great Lakes Comic-Con, or following weekend, I'm at Great Lakes Comic-Con in Detroit. Right after that, the next weekend after that, I'm at Emerald City Comic-Con in Seattle. And then I have GalaxyCon Richmond and C2E2 as well. So a lot of different opportunities for people to get me to sign the book. I also have my own website, farawaypress.com. And I do sign copies off of there. And I even have an eBay store. Go to Faraway Press. The novel is not up there yet, and it won't be for a while. But when it is, it'll be there. But yes. And also March 14th. That is when that Star Wars Legends Epic Collection Volume 5 for the Old Republic comes out. And that's from Marvel, and that'll be in comic shops and other places. Definitely go pre-order that or make sure you get it. And people can find me online. You mentioned the Comicron website. Also on Twitter, JJM Faraway. That's also my handle on post.news. And then I am John Jackson Miller on Instagram and Facebook.
Guys, and once again, I'll drop all the important links in the video description below. I'll send the direct link to Amazon where you can pick up the new Star Trek book. I'm a huge Star Trek fan. Hope you guys are as well. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope 25 billion fans get to see it, get the exposure to John Jackson Miller. Thank you so much, and we'll see you guys later. Take care, everyone.
I appreciate it. May the Force live long and prosper.
I always like doing that in my podcast with fans. I do this. I'm a huge Star Trek fan.